Concepts in a Teacup by HS Consultancy, presented by Harry Sewell.
Cultural essentialism. So, this is kind of very interesting because, you might find alternative explanations or ways of describing the concept, just stereotyping or making assumptions about a particular group. But it's really helpful to understand the concept of cultural essentialism. What it relates to is this kind of belief, which, if I put simply, is that this is what people who look like you do. And that's kind of really rooted in our assumptions about social groups. As I say, it could be seen as stereotyping, but let's kind of think about a specific way in which that might manifest. If there is an incident that the government or the kind of criminal justice system say we consider this to be an act of terrorism, depending on who has done this thing, we either believe that this is an aberration from what we might expect, or we believe, consciously or unconsciously, that this is what people who look like that do. So if it were someone who was Muslim, for example, we might say, not me, but people might say, oh, a Muslim person carried out this act of terrorism. But if it were someone who was white who did that, we might be at pains to say, oh, this was someone from the far right, because what we're communicating in that is we don't kind of think that this was just a white person, because this is an essentialist aspect of being white. But actually, this is a subset within being white, almost like an out-group within that larger white group. So we'd go, right, that's someone from the far right, a way of distancing, whereas people from other groups are often not afforded with that description that really makes it clear that what we're seeing is a subset, that we're seeing something within the group that is an aberration from the norm or the dominant cultural characteristics of that particular group. So it's kind of very, very helpful to understand often that cultural essentialism shows up in that way, where what we're seeing is a confirmation. And you could kind of think about it in terms of confirmation bias, that we're seeing a confirmation of what we expect someone who looks like this. And often it might not even be what their actual identity is. It might be that that's the identity we perceive that they have, or the group that we perceive that they belong to. So we see a set of behaviors and then we think, all right, okay, yeah, this is kind of very typical of that kind of person or group. In practice, it often kind of shows up as a lack of curiosity or a lack of empathy. So if you think, for example, about a young black guy, just as an example, who might have been groomed into county lines. Well, if you kind of think, well, this is kind of what these guys do and get into, then your curiosity about, like, well, what's the disruption? What would have made somebody at age of 13 get involved in that kind of world where all the risks are pretty evident around them? And what kind of support services can we wrap around them? Maybe sometimes we don't have that approach because we think this is what they do, so we're more likely to go down the route of the criminal justice system. So I'm not just hypothesizing, there's kind of research papers, and if you kind of look at the Youth Justice Board's website, you can kind of see that there are different pathways depending on the racialized identities that people perceive that these young people have. So what we see are these kind of biases in our approach, based sometimes on that cultural essentialism.